The Elmhurst Historical Museum, located in downtown Elmhurst, is proud to present award-winning exhibits for visitors of all ages. Our Adult Tea Time Talk series, family programs, and special events make learning about history interesting and fun. Admission is free, and on-site parking is available. Visit the Elmhurst Historical Museum soon. Call us today, or go to our website for the latest program details.
Visit Elmhurst.org to explore the new City of Elmhurst website. Find out the latest Elmhurst news, pay utility bills and parking tickets, report concerns, and much more. Elmhurst.org is an ideal way to discover what Elmhurst offers your business, your family, your life.
Welcome to Elmhurst Now. I'm Ken Bartels, your host, and tonight we're talking about historical preservation, specifically historical preservation in Elmhurst. And to do that, I have a member of the Historic Preservation Commission, Chuck Goding. And Chuck, welcome to Elmhurst Now.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
I want to start really at the very beginning and just ask you, how long has there been a Historic Preservation Commission in Elmhurst or something like it?
Well, City Council passed an ordinance in 2006 creating the commission and defining the criteria needed for a property to be named an Elmhurst landmark. And the commission was then charged with the responsibility of taking the nomination for landmark status, reviewing it, making sure that it met all the criteria, and then recommending to the council that it be named a Elmhurst landmark.
Now, prior to 2006, though, there were groups or organizations that worked with historic preservation, correct?
Correct. The Elmhurst Historical Society was in place. It was an independent operation. It had no ties to the city, except if it made recommendations on properties. But basically it was promoting the idea of preservation and honoring those significant properties that we have in the city.
Now, I know there's 7 commissioners currently on
Correct.
the commission, and are there particular backgrounds of your fellow commissioners, your background itself, in terms of what the city would be looking for a commissioner on this type of board?
There are, of the 7 commissioners, 3 have to reflect specific careers or backgrounds. We have to have an architect, we have to have a lawyer, and we have to have a realtor among the 7 members. The remaining 4 can then be people who are interested in historic preservation and are willing to share their time to serve on the commission.
And you meet monthly, every other month? Monthly?
We meet monthly. When we first started out in 2006, we didn't have a lot of things on our agenda, so we didn't meet every month. But of late, it's been every month, and we always have a lot of things on our plate to deal with.
Well, I've been in Elmhurst myself 35 years, which means I'm a relative newcomer by this city's standards. But it strikes me that this is a town that has always taken historic preservation pretty seriously. And first of all, would you agree with that statement, or?
I think so, yes. They have been, with some exceptions, been very careful to keep properties that have meaning. The Churchville Schoolhouse, for instance, the city did acquire that and spend quite a bit of money to restore it and make it so it was something where school children could go and get the feel of what it was like to study in a one-room schoolhouse.
How long have you personally been interested and involved with historic preservation?
Mayor Marcucci said I was the first request for appointment to the commission that he received. And so I have been a part of the commission since 2006 when it was formed. Charmaine Tellefson has also been on the commission for an equal amount of time. I think we're the graybeards on the commission, if you will.
Personal interest in historic preservation prior to that?
I think it was, for me, a gradual evolving thing. When we bought our current house, we didn't realize what background it had, what significance it had architecturally, and we learned that over time, dealing with relatives of the first owners and second owners of the house, who came forward and told us a lot of things about it that we hadn't had a chance to know ourselves.
When you bought your house, Chuck, did you know it was historically significant by Elmhurst standards?
Had no idea.
Okay.
We bought the house because it had a dining room large enough to accommodate a dining room set that we inherited from my wife's parents.
So you grew into historic preservation basically within your own home.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, I would suspect that that's not that unusual a story.
You're probably right, yeah, that people become aware of it, and it captures their attention, and they begin to read more about it, study more about it, and so on. And it's fascinating because you're kind of like a detective going back and gathering facts here and there and kind of putting them together and weaving a fabric of that kind of tells you what life was like back in that time.
Well, I know the Elmhurst Historical Museum, I just was in there very recently. They have a map on the wall in one of their reference areas that has color-coded the entire city by when a home was built. Mm-hmm. And it's just fascinating to look at really the emergence of the city in terms of where those colors lie in terms of decades of home construction. And then throughout the map, there's I'm going to say yellow. I'm not sure that's the right one, but there's these dots of a different kind of color that kind of stand out. And then there's collections of them, which means there are certain streets in Elmhurst even today that are populated with historically significant homes. Mm-hmm. And then dotted throughout the community, they exist as well.
Right.
And it's just it's a fascinating thing for people who own homes to look at that chart and say, golly, my home was built in 38. The guy across the street's home was built in 49. It's another way of getting a picture of the community.
Exactly. And you kind of see that initially homes were built along York Street because that was the main thoroughfare. And if you wanted to get from your home to shopping places, have your horse shod, whatever your interest was, you wanted to be close to that main street. And then as the city grew larger, then people decided to move further away from the main street because there were now paved streets that enabled you to get from where you were to where you wanted to go.
Yeah, the structures necessary to live your life, as you said, near the blacksmith if the horse needs help, and walk to church, walk to school.
Exactly.
The whole dynamic. Would you say that Elmhurst has more or less historic structures within it than towns that are roughly 175 years old?
It would be hard to say for sure where we stand in a comparison like that. I think we have a good number of homes that go back to the late 1800s. And a few that go back further than that. And we're fortunate to have them. They add interest and character to this city that would be a shame to lose.
I'm going to be doing a program later in the year on the the significance of the year 1871 and its significance to Elmhurst and to the city of Chicago. And of course, as you would certainly know, the fire was in 1871 in the city, and just a few months later, the German immigrants show up in Elmhurst to found Elmhurst College. And of course, there was already a well-established community here at that point. Thomas Barber Bryan gives the college some land, sells the college some land, is a key figure in the rebuilding of Chicago. It's interesting to think of Elmhurst as a summer home community for folks that were down in the city.
Right.
Seems like the reverse would be true.
Well, it was about a full day's drive by carriage back in those days. And that's how basically Hill Cottage got started, because it was a inn where they could get food and overnight rest as they proceeded further west. And the Wilder Mansion, which was originally built by Seth Wadhams, he built that in 1868, and he paid $100,000 to build that house at a time when houses probably cost $2,000 or $3,000 to build. And he built it as a summer home. He had a beautiful home on the north side of Chicago, which was his primary residence. And he was a millionaire ice merchant. Knickerbocker Ice Company was his company.
Back when a millionaire meant something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, that home in Chicago was destroyed in 1871. And he and his family moved out to Elmhurst and made the house here their year-round primary residence.
And the Wilder Mansion story and the grounds and eventually Wilder Park and all the stops in between is just another fascinating center of town story. Has the commission done a survey in terms of how many historic structures there are inside the boundaries of Elmhurst?
We inherited a couple of surveys that had been done by other organizations. The City Center was one. There was a group from the Art Institute who were studying architecture that surveyed the area around where the hospital used to be. We did our own survey, I think it was 4 years ago now, where we looked at all of the homes on Kenilworth and Arlington from St. Charles Road up to Marion Street. And they were categorized as significant or not significant, and what style of architecture they were, any information that could be gathered about them, who the architect was, if known, who the builder was, who the first resident was. It was quite an exhaustive survey. We are going to undertake another this fall and pick up York Street from St. Charles to Palmer Drive, Cottage Hill, and then on the north side of St. Charles Road from York all the way out to Hagen's. And we feel that we have some significant homes and properties in there that we'd like to learn more about, and the survey group will do that for us.
At least in the center of town, there are a number of structures, as you've mentioned, on York Road, on Kenilworth, and Arlington.
Right.
All would have a number of historic structures on them. Do you have the oldest in mind? Is there one that is head and shoulders above the others in terms of age?
Well, Hill Cottage probably is that one. I think it was 1843 that Hill Cottage was first built, and then it was moved to its current location. I think it was in the latter part of the 1800s or early 1900s that took place. And I think that would be the oldest property. And we had the Stemple house, which dated to 1850. And I know Mrs. Stemple said that she was born in that house. And she fortunately lived right behind us, so we got a lot of information from her and Russ about the area at that time.
And of course, Immaculate Conception Parish comes into being about that same vintage, a little bit after that. And some of the other churches don't probably date back quite that far, but some of them would. You already had mentioned the Churchville Schoolhouse, which is the 1860s. So a number of historic things, without doubt.
Well, and you mentioned Thomas Barber Bryan, and he had a chapel in his home here in Elmhurst, which he used on Sunday mornings and invited friends and relatives to go to church with him and his family.
We're going to take a quick break, Chuck, and then we'll come back and we want to talk about what's going on with the commission in the present day.
Okay.
This is Elmhurst Now. We'll be right back.
The Churchville Schoolhouse opens the door to the best education in history. Visitors to the Churchville Schoolhouse take a step back in time to watch history unfold in a restored National Register of Historic Places property that dates to the Civil War era. Students of today walk in the footsteps of local farm children from the early days of DuPage County for an authentic living history experience led by a schoolmarm of the early 1900s. A visit to the Churchville Schoolhouse is hands-on, educational, and fun. Participants use slate chalkboards and McGuffey readers for the day's lessons. And children will be asked to follow proper classroom etiquette. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are practiced, and students test their skills during an old-fashioned spelling bee. And of course, no school day is complete without recess featuring games of the early 1900s. The schoolhouse is a popular place for scouts and day camps too. Group visits can also be arranged for service clubs, tour groups, and other adult organizations. The Churchville Schoolhouse Living History Program is operated by the Elmhurst Historical Museum. Call the museum today to book a field trip or find out more information. Call 630-833-1457 or visit our website at churchvilleschoolhouse.org. The Churchville Schoolhouse is waiting to open the doors for your school or community group. Plan a memorable learning experience today for the best education in history.
Welcome back to Elmhurst Now. I'm Ken Bartels, and I'm talking with Chuck Goding about historic preservation in Elmhurst. And Chuck, I wanted to, there are terms that get thrown around in terms of historic preservation, landmarks, historic structures, the National Register of Historic Places. Can you provide some definition?
I'll try. A landmark property is one that meets the criteria that we have set up here in Elmhurst through the ordinance to honor and set apart those properties that have special significance. And that could be architecturally, it could be historically related to the city or some famous person who lived in the property in its early days. The National Register of Historic Places is a similar program, but it does not have any attempts to protect the property like our ordinance does. The ordinance says that if you have a landmark property, you cannot change the exterior that is visible from the street, which is the main street coming where your address is. And in the National Register, they do not have that provision, so you could change a lot of things about the house or whatever kind of building it is, and all you would do is lose your listing in the National Register, which may or may not be a critical thing for a person. But with the ordinance here in Elmhurst, we say you cannot change the exterior. You can do what you need to and want to inside, and you can do it in a back portion of the house if you want to add a family room or enlarge a kitchen or whatever you want to do. That's possible and it's acceptable.
The curb appeal can't change.
Correct.
Exactly. Okay. Are there more residential or commercially significant buildings in Elmhurst, would you say?
Probably more residential, simply because there are more homes in Elmhurst than there are business properties. But we are fortunate. We do have a couple. We have an H.G. Fidelke designed property at Park and Adele. We have the old Weber Bakery on York Road. We have the York Theater. Those are all recognizable buildings, and they all have style elements of particular architectural styles that were popular within a certain period of time.
We've got turret buildings both on Park Avenue and on York, and
right.
the old City Hall on Addison.
Correct.
It's interesting because just the average citizen taking a walk downtown, if they spend time looking up, they'll see, names and dates and what structures were, and I think that's pretty interesting. And of course, the landmark houses are the ones with the little medallions on them, correct?
Well, there are two kinds of plaques that recognize properties. We have an oval medallion that says landmark property and gives the year that is the year of significance for that particular property. And the Historical Museum also did a recognition program of properties that were of historical interest to the city and to this area. Like the old railroad station house down on South York Road, and that is a property that was recognized by the city.
Why do you think that Elmhurst wound up being a destination point for some of the most nationally or world-renowned, in many cases, architects that wound up building structures here?
I think a lot of it came with the late 1890s when the Prairie School of Architecture began to come to the fore. And this was all part of the arts and crafts movement that affected a lot of things, pottery, furniture, but in architecture, the craftsman style and the Prairie School were the two dominant elements from about 1895 to about 1910. And then we had a different style that came into play and became more popular.
Now, those styles and many of these homes were the focal point of a July 18, just this past July 18th, tour put on by the Historic Preservation Commission. Would you share with our audience a little bit about where the idea came from and how it played out?
The idea kind of came from the Chicago Architectural Foundation that did a tour earlier this year of a number of buildings in downtown Chicago that were architecturally significant. And we thought, we have a variety of architectural styles here in Elmhurst, and why don't we plan a tour where people can see these little gems that are located throughout the community in various locations. And depending on the year built, they reflect those architectural styles that were popular at the time, from Queen Anne on to Romanesque to French eclectic to shingle. There are a whole variety of them, and they're beautifully designed and beautifully crafted. And it's just, if you stop and look at them, you just begin to admire how well they look and how well they have been preserved over time.
So the tour itself took place on, as I said, July 18. I know there were 2 parts to the tour.
Yes.
How many places were visited?
We had 10 different properties on each of the tours. So the morning tour visited, I think, 8 residential properties and 2 commercial properties. And then the afternoon tour was about the same breakdown. We may have had a couple of public spaces in there as well. I'm counting the Mies van der Rohe house at the Elmhurst Art Museum as a public place, and the Historical Museum itself, which is a landmark property,
Right,
as a public space
right.
as well.
And then I'm sure you went over to Old Main and
We did.
It's. Did you go out to Churchville? Was Churchville
We
on the
didn't.
tour?
We thought about it, we talked about it, and we decided that that was quite a trip to get from the immediate downtown or close by residential neighborhoods out to the Churchville Schoolhouse. But we've kind of put together a list of things. If we're going to do this again, what should we do? And I think the Churchville Schoolhouse and the Mount Emblem Windmill are 2 things that we should add in the future for a tour like this.
Now, you've already shared that you live in a historically significant home here in Elmhurst. Do you have eras that you personally enjoy? You just enjoy them all?
I enjoy them all for different reasons. The Queen Anne style of architecture, which many people call Victorian or painted ladies.
Right.
And I mean, they're just a great burst of color and energy. I mean, they're just exciting to look at. They almost like they're moving. And because of all the variety of architectural techniques that they have used in the design of that style of architecture. And then you get into some like the Foursquare, which are very strong. They look like fortresses. And you just look at them and say, wow, I could see this as holding off a band of Indians who might be coming to attack the house, because it's that much of a structure, a stockade almost kind of building.
Have we lost buildings that you regret?
We have. We have, and that's been a combination of a lot of factors that one cannot solve all of them, and so we lose them. I almost cried one time recently when we lost the only shingle style of architecture house we had here in Elmhurst. It fell into very bad repair and came down and has been replaced. But that one was unique. And I was really sorry to see it go.
Well, I know there have been some others in just recent years. The Crane Mansion, which was on York Road, was in such bad repair. I don't even want to guess what it would have cost to put that back into any place. You mentioned the Stemple House, and I'm sure there are others that come to mind for you. While you understand, I mean, on one level, you understand why sometimes it just can't be done.
Right.
But at the same time, you look at those, and once they're gone, they're gone.
That's right.
And
we're not going to build any more.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned landmark status, and you defined that very well for us a few minutes ago. Are there advantages for people? It sounds like there is a disadvantage. You can't change the way it looks, at least from the street.
Right.
But are there advantages to working to get that designation for your home if it qualifies?
Well, one thing that an owner of a landmark property can do is that if there is a need of substantial work to be done on the house, structurally or from a design standpoint, that if you're a landmark, you can invest in doing that work and at the same time get property tax relief to offset the money that you're investing in the house.
So if I'm watching this program and I think I'm in a historically significant home or even a landmark designated home, how can I find out more about how the commission can assist me?
There is a booklet here that talks about the ordinance that was passed in 2006, talks about the commission, the kinds of things we do. Most of the work that we've been asked to perform is of an educational nature, to inform people who live in Elmhurst about the properties and about what's significant, what's important, and it builds character in the town. I know we have the phrase character counts, and we think in architecture character counts too.
Well, Chuck, thank you for joining me on Elmhurst Now, and all the best to the commission. It's kind of fun to be in a historically significant city.
It is.
Thank you. This has been Elmhurst Now. I'm Ken Bartels. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again.
We live in some of the best communities in Illinois. We care about our neighbors. We work hard to preserve our quality of life. But there's something we forget about in Elmhurst. A river runs through it, and it's up to us to protect it. Our storm drains flow to Salt Creek, and that means our harmful waste does too. So try using fewer chemicals on your lawn. Avoid leaking fluids from cars. And grow native flowers and plants to absorb more rainwater. Don't muddy the waters. Do your part to clean up Salt Creek.
There are several thousand collisions involving trains each year, which result in over 1,000 injuries and several hundred deaths. A majority of these deaths occur when someone is struck by a train while trespassing on railroad property. Remember, railroad property is private property. Trespassing along railroad property is not only against the law, it's very dangerous. Avoid taking shortcuts. The only safe place to cross railroad tracks is at a designated crossing. Don't get caught dead on the tracks. Stay off, stay away, stay alive.